Hi all, Raidwald here. This is my second video in response to Lee Lemon, Atheist Lee, on her video about theist evidence. This one will focus on the topic of personal experience, which is kind of a big deal in most theist and atheist debates. The idea that personal experience can or cannot be trusted as reliable means of constructing your models of reality. So I'm going to address her arguments, which are common to the atheist world. So here we go.
The second argument that people talk about is personal experience. And personal experience is not evidence in and of itself.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. It may not be proof in and of itself, but even there, I'd say there's a decent case for it. I could give you all kinds of, like, for example, I have a daughter. My personal experience of my daughter is the only evidence I have for that. Right? Now, I could say that my wife can also confirm through her personal experience that we have a daughter, but her confirmation to me is just another personal experience. When it really comes down to it, all we have, the only evidence ever available to us, is personal experience. Well, I should say the only empirical evidence we ever have is personal experience. But you know what? Actually, even rationality, like if you're going through a logical proof, you experience your thought. Thought is something that you experience, and so it falls within that category as well. Even mathematical and logical proofs fall into the category of personal experience. Now, it is personal experience which you can try to document and reproduce over and over again, which makes it a little less subjective along that whole scale of subjective to objective. But the problem is, again, reproducibility is just more personal experience. Personal experience is evidence. Now, my personal experiences may not convince you of something I accept to be true. That is a valid position. That's perfectly fine. Now, I would say that you do accept other people's personal experiences as evidence. You do it plenty throughout your life. You, I'm sure, have not gone out on your own and attempted to reprove or disprove Einstein's theory of relativity. I'm sure you have not tried doing that. Why? Because you accept the word of people who have. And how have they done that? Through their personal experience. And, you know, there's the rational side to it, that it just kind of makes sense. It fits. It's not got any obvious inconsistencies yet. And so you're happy to accept a great many things based off of people's personal experience and their word that they had those experiences, right? There's an element of trust there as well. And the more you trust a person, the more you will be willing to accept their personal experiences as convincing evidence. But simply making the claim that personal experience is not evidence is unfounded. And it claims more than you were really hoping to claim here.
If a personal experience is factually true, then you can provide some kind of corroborating evidence for it.
This is not universally true, and I think you understand that as well as me. For example, the historical record is replete with references to Huns on horses. Some estimates are that each Hun had 10 horses. Each Hun warrior. And yet, there was zero corroborating evidence of this until in the 1990s a Hun princess was found with a bridle buried with her and 5 horse heads buried nearby. Now, even after 1990, to my knowledge, there is no evidence that horses were widely used among the Huns. right? That we're talking about royalty in that other instance. So we don't know. And even there, we're talking about the grave goods of royalty. So you can reasonably assume that she had access to horses, but it's still an assumption, right? You still don't have proof. And, it's evidence. But it's the evidence of the exact same type that you would be willing to shrug off were it given in defense of the Bible or something like that, right? As a historical record. So, yeah, that's just one instance. There's you don't even have to go far back in history. There's plenty of rape allegations for which there is no corroborating evidence. There's the accusation and the defense of the accused. It's a he said, she said type of situation, and somebody's story is right. But how are you supposed to corroborate it with evidence? Particularly if there was no damage on the victim, or if enough time has passed that no damage would be reasonably expected. So, yeah, there's any number of examples I could provide here. Just because something actually happened does not mean that corroborating evidence above and beyond the person's account that witnessed it should exist. It's a non sequitur.
This is a good thing. This is a very good thing. Because without this, I can just accuse you of anything, take you to court, and then the judge will just grant me money because I said so.
Nope, the supposed legal standard is that you must prove your accusation beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the theoretical legal standard. Evidence is not the same as proof. Right? You can bring your narrative, you can bring your personal experience to the judge, and it can be accepted into the court as evidence. Likewise, what I say can be accepted as evidence as well. If that's all the evidence is, then you have not proven your case beyond a reasonable doubt. So here again we see your conflation of the idea of evidence and proof. You need to separate those. They're not the same. Poor evidence is still evidence. Insufficient evidence is still evidence. Unconvincing evidence is still evidence. Your point that you were attempting to make at the beginning of this film, the video, the whole thing you were presenting as your argument, as your core argument, is that the evidence that theists try to bring is not actually evidence. You haven't made that point. And quite ironically, the evidence you have brought to bear in this case is not evidence for that case. It can be provided as evidence for other cases, for other arguments, for other conclusions, but for the conclusion you stated that you were driving at, the evidence you have provided is not just insufficient, it's not just unconvincing, it's not just poor, it's misplaced, it's misdirected. It doesn't get to the point you are trying to make. All of it is essentially a distraction from that point.
For example, let's say that you and I are neighbors and we don't...
Okay, just a heads up, I'm going to be filtering out some of the strong language she uses here just because I want to keep this channel as family-friendly as possible. So, go ahead and continue with your story.
I don't know, maybe we're on bad terms. Maybe your dog shits in my yard and I'm trying to ease the fence forward a little bit to try to steal more of your property or something. And I come out to go to work in the morning and I see a big dent in my car. And I say, I just know in my heart it was my neighbor. So I take you to court and I tell the judge, listen, I got reasons to believe that this guy is, he hit my car, we don't really like each other and stuff, and therefore I know it was him. I just know it in my heart. Please make him give me money to repair my car. Well, the judge is going to say no.
He probably won't say no. He'll probably ask you for more evidence. Because, and here's the key part, the evidence of your witness is not enough for you to condemn a man and take away some of his stuff. It's insufficient to that purpose. Now, if you got 2 or 3 other people to corroborate your personal experience with their personal experiences, saying that they saw it, or even that they believed that it was consistent with his character and with his relationship to you, well, that right there may be enough evidence for a judge to give a ruling, right? In a civil court. So, again, it's evidence. It's just a single person's word is not generally considered enough evidence in order to inflict some sort of punishment on another person. It's insufficient evidence, but it's still evidence.
Thankfully, right? Isn't that a great thing? I can't just take you to court and just accuse you of stuff just because I really believe it. I don't even have to be lying. I can honestly believe this stuff. The nice thing is that the judge is going to ask for evidence.
He's going to ask for more or corroborating evidence. What you have already brought forth is evidence. It's just insufficient for him to take any kind of action. So let's again, you have to be specific and consistent in your categories here, and you're not.
He's going to want some kind of security camera footage, or even something like, my car has damage on it, your car also happens to have damage, and my car has your car's paint, and your car has my car's paint. And we can even do a lab test to see if it's the same kind of paint. There are ways that we can prove it, and there are ways that we can disprove it.
All right, so before we move on to there, this works because it's a hypothetical. What if it's not a hypothetical? What if we're actually in such a situation? You can't just all of a sudden make paint show up on your car or video camera footage appear. You want to get some damages out of me, and so what you do is you will make the best case that you can. And if you're bringing a frivolous lawsuit, i.e. you have nothing but your own suspicions to back it up, then sure, it'll be tossed out. That evidence, though existent, is not evidence of what you are trying to prove. Right? For you to say, I'm suspicious that this person did this to my car, it's evidence of your frame of mind, of your state of mind. It's not even proof of that, but it's evidence of that. But it's not evidence that I actually did anything. And for somebody to take action against me, right, to send uniformed people to my house to appropriate money or property from me and give it to you, for that action to occur, there needs to be greater evidence brought forth to support your case. So, what if there was just, instead of video footage, a few other people who are willing to corroborate your side of the story? Now that's a case that might actually be accepted. That's a case you could possibly win. And nowhere in there was there some sort of empirical, reproducible evidence. There's just the word of a few different people who are not necessarily going to be biased one side or the other. But even if let's say all of those witnesses hate me, but aren't necessarily going to be benefited in any way, right? You're the one getting the payment, they aren't. And even with their bias against me, if they're known to be honest people, then their word could be enough evidence, sufficient evidence, for that appropriation and redistribution of my property.
You can try to say, well, here's my plane ticket. I just arrived back home last night, or today or something. I arrived back home after the damage was done, so it couldn't have possibly been me.
If you really want to split hairs here, and you would if this was a theist, a similar argument to a theist argument for God, the existence of a plane ticket is not proof that I was on a plane or elsewhere or unable to do that damage to that car. I could have paid somebody else to do the damage to the car. I could have simply purchased the plane ticket with my name on it, picked it up, did the damage to the car, and used the plane ticket as supposed evidence that I was on a plane. It's not. It's evidence that I have a plane ticket with my name on it. You're claiming more than you can prove.
So there's other evidence that we can provide. That's a good thing. The other thing, too, you have to remember is that if you're going to accept personal experience as evidence, then you have to accept all the other religions and all the other gods, because you know what? All those other religions, the people that follow them, they also say that they have personal experience.
This is simply not the case. First of all, you are again conflating evidence with proof. If I accept somebody else's personal experience of their deity as evidence, it doesn't necessarily mean I have to accept it as proof of their God. Second of all, there are dozens of other factors that can work on a personal experience to either increase it or decrease it in its reliability in my sight as evidence, right? Is the personal experience something that can be reproduced by other people? Can it be verified through my own personal experience? For example, of a videotape, right? Are you someone I trust? Or are you just some stranger off the street? Would a lie personally benefit you? Etc., etc. Third, I can accept your personal experience and reject your interpretation of it. Right? The fact of the matter, these are all things that you yourself do as an atheist. You are happy to accept certain types of personal experience from other people as evidence of what they are claiming, depending on the situation, and you're going to reject other personal experiences brought as evidence of other conclusions in other contexts. Bottom line, it all comes down to what you as an individual are willing to accept as meeting your standard of evidence for a particular conclusion. And this will vary depending on the conclusion and how it fits within your worldview. Anyway, back to interpretation. I can accept the personal experience of a Buddhist as being personal experience of God, and yet reject the interpretation he lays upon that experience of what type of God that is, right? There are plenty of instances in which an experience of God is not necessarily specific to the God that it is being considered evidence for. So there's any number of ways that can be approached. And it's not necessarily inconsistent in any worldview. Now I know you would take your own interpretation of that, and you would attack us on grounds of like I brought up earlier, confirmation bias and etc. etc. The fact of the matter is that's a dual-edged sword. That cuts your way too. Atheists are going to reject any evidence that they don't see as fitting with their worldview, just as much as theists reject the same, right? So in cases of experiences of God that are not easily explained away through hallucination, dishonesty, or just emotional reactions, you tend to kind of just either not deal with it only nominally, just enough to be able to shrug off your cognitive dissonance on the matter, and you just kind of move on with your lives. Look somewhere else, right? And this isn't an irregular occurrence. There really are plenty of things that atheists will just say, well, that's just a coincidence, or that really doesn't mean anything. Well, that was somehow a hallucination held by 3 people at the same time of the same thing, right? Or those people were just lying, even though it worked against their own self-interests. There's confirmation bias both ways, bottom line.
The stuff that you say isn't unique. All the healing from prayer or spells, the miracles that you've witnessed, the visions that you might have received, or that you have a friend that's received in the church or something, those are not unique to your religion.
And I guess I can't speak for other religions here, but in my religion, I wouldn't expect it to be. I honestly believe that in a God that is a heavenly Father of all people who do live and have ever lived on this earth. Any blessing he would want to pour out on myself or people who believe similar to me, he would want to pour out on all his children, all of them. He would not want to reserve certain blessings for just those who believe like I believe. Why would you expect that to be any different? Now, there may be religions out there who believe that they are the only ones who will receive any blessings from God in any way, shape, or form. Okay. And if you're going to say that such alleged miracles are coincidences or flukes of nature or something like that, you know what? There's a possibility that some of them are. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are. So, again, here you're really not proving anything, and you're not arguing against, well, there may be some forms of theism that do believe what you are saying. And you know what? That's a good argument against those forms of theism. I really don't know of a whole lot of people, at least in the United States, and of the Christian religion, which you primarily focus on, that would believe that think that God is so narrow-minded as to focus only on their sect and to wish harm on all others. It's actually pretty much against what we see in the Bible, explicitly stated in the Bible. So most Christians would step away from that type of interpretation of God.
So what could they be? Well, science says things like we have a science of religious experience. The brain will do things that causes an effect on the body when we're in certain situations. We know about the placebo effect. We know about adrenaline's effect on pain. We know about natural remission. We know about how medical treatment works. I've heard people talk about prayer healing, while somebody's in the hospital,
If our science on these things is as well developed as you are making the claim that it is, then why do we even bother with medical science anymore at all? We have something that can heal all kinds of unhealable things. We can reverse natural defects. We can naturally remit cancer without having to poison people. Why would we even bother poisoning and irradiating them anymore? Right? Science can reproduce this.
Like a surgery or something. If somebody comes through the surgery, they say, oh, it was God. No, it was medical science. Because if the surgery was ineffective and people died all the time from it, we would stop using this as surgery as a form of treatment because it's ineffective. So the fact that the person pulled through from the surgery was an expected outcome. This isn't anything magical or divine.
First, this is a false dichotomy. There's no reason it can't be both medical science and God. And you don't even have to take the interpretation that God has granted the medical science in order to be able to put combine those two. It's really not hard. You could believe that God guided the hands of the surgeon, or any number of factors that God stepped in and took control of in order to help you make it through that surgery. So, again, you're claiming here more than you can really demonstrate or prove. And beyond that, you're focusing on just the easy cases. Someone coming through a surgery is not always an expected outcome. In fact, out of my own personal life, I recently lost a cousin. A young cousin. She was not yet 30. They found a blood clot in her skull. They did surgery to remove the clot before it could get to her brain. And she made it through that surgery reasonably okay. She woke up. The next day, she started bleeding profusely in the brain. They rushed her to surgery. And apparently the doctors knew before they got her into that room that she was dead. She was gone. But they went ahead and they did the surgery anyway. Who knows? Maybe they could have gotten her back. Probably not. I trust that they knew full well she was gone. I think they did that so that they could come back to the family and said that they had done everything they could, and to say it honestly. Now, that's not a rare case. When you're talking about surgery, when you're talking about cutting into healthy flesh, whether or not what's underneath the flesh is healthy, the flesh itself is healthy. When you're cutting into someone, you're doing so because there is a great risk of that person dying. Them coming through that surgery may or may not be a pretty expected outcome. There are surgeries out there with a fatality rate higher than the people who survive it, right? We continue with those surgeries because they are the best we know how to do. And they are the best choice out of some pretty crappy choices. So, again, you're addressing the best case scenario for your point and ignoring the worst case scenario for your point. This is actually, in a way, a kind of confirmation bias, right? Everything that doesn't perfectly fit into what you're trying to argue doesn't exist, and you're just going to ignore it. This is just demonstration that confirmation bias does cut against atheist positions as well.
And again, this is not something your religious people claim. It's something that all religious people claim, that there's some kind of answered prayers.
What I don't understand is how that argument, in fact, weakens our position rather than strengthening it. Right? If scientists at MIT and scientists at Harvard both agree that atoms may be split, doesn't that actually strengthen the position that atoms may be split?
Visions people receive of their deity or their deity's minions, like an angel or something. These are things that people really believe. There's also encounters people have with the negative deities, any kind of demon or jinn or something like that. I've met people that are Wiccans and they feel that they've been cursed. So there's like a negative encounter that they've had with through their belief system. These people all believe the same thing, and you guys all have the same thing in common. No evidence for your deity or deities.
That statement is false in two regards. One, if you really wanted to, I'm sure you could find more than one thing in common. And two, there is evidence. Everybody has evidence. The evidence may be lacking, insufficient, it may be unconvincing, but it's still evidence. If it leads to any kind of a conclusion whatsoever, even unsuccessfully, then it's evidence. Remember, poor evidence is still evidence.
We have evidence as skeptics that explain how these things work scientifically, that we've seen, that we've studied, that we've measured. Even with prayer, there are absolutely studies on prayer's effect on health, and it doesn't work.
Such being the case, it is then your duty to give me a link to those sources so that I can read them, so that I can vet whether or not they are good, sound methodologically, and to see the results for myself. You did not do so, which immediately calls this assertion into question. So I went ahead and I did a little looking on my own. And first of all, you have to concede the point that religion in general, and yes, actually prayer itself, does have very well documented health benefits. I will link a paper that's kind of just a summary of other studies, but it has its own contributions as well. But I'm going to link that below to demonstrate this. But yeah, there's a overwhelming degree of studies that have been put into religious observance, including prayer specifically, but religious observance in general having very significant effects on people's health. And there are all kinds of naturalistic explanations you can find for those, but even controlling for those causes, there is a statistically significant difference in the health and lifespan of people who regularly observe their religion and people who do not regularly observe a religion. So, there is that. But I figured we should give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to look for what I consider to be the worst case scenario from my point of view, right? And I figured intercessory prayer, right? Because whatever psychological benefits there might be to meditative prayer, having somebody pray for somebody else doesn't necessarily transfer those benefits, right? If I'm meditating in your behalf, you do not gain the benefits of meditation yourself, or you wouldn't expect anything like that. So I looked for a double-blind study on intercessory prayer, and the first one I came across actually, and here's the thing, because I was willing to believe you had something on to back your claim up, I was actually expecting this to demonstrate that prayer did not have a statistically significant effect. On the contrary, it did, and not just scooting by on the significant. There was 11% fewer adverse outcomes to hospital stays of people who didn't realize they were being prayed for or not prayed for, of roughly about 1,000 people, right? The doctors weren't in on it. It was a double-blind study, and roughly 1,000 participants, a few excluded based on, what seemed like reasonable reasons to me. They wanted people to have time to be prayed for. So if you're going into the hospital and dying in the next half hour, they excluded cases like that. But other than that, they took roughly 1,000 people, just in order of them showing up to the hospital, and they studied their outcomes based off of a scale that had been developed by another party, and they found that there were roughly 11% fewer adverse outcomes in the cases of people who were being prayed for. And they even concluded at the end of the study that intercessory prayer might be a good avenue to pursue for treatment in conjunction with medical treatment. So, again, I'm going to link that below. You can read it and pick it apart for yourselves. If there's something wrong with that study, or if they are overwhelmed by other studies finding the opposite, then I am happy to see y'all's evidence and y'all's and the studies you would like to bring to bear. But it looks like you're losing out on this one, Lee.
So, in the light of in the fact that we have all of this evidence that suggests that this is a natural thing, there's no reason to assume it's a supernatural phenomenon.
You understand that the opposing side in this argument believes that all natural occurrences are part of God's law, right? That natural law is God's law. That natural occurrences have God's finger on them. You understand that, right? I just want to make sure you know you're not actually arguing against your opponent's position in any way, shape, or form by pointing this out.
And the fact that it happens universally. It doesn't only happen with your deity. It doesn't only happen with your prayers or your spells. It doesn't only happen with your ritual. It doesn't only happen with your laying of hands.
I try to keep my comments as general as possible, but where I need to be specific, I try to keep it as general as possible within Christianity. I'm going to respond to this as a Christian because I'm not aware enough of all other religions to be able to be general to all of them. So I'll stay general to Christianity. You understand, of course, that the Christian God claims to be the Heavenly Father of all, to love all of Earth's children. Would we really expect such a being to limit such, let's just call it, benevolent blessings Would he really restrict that just to people who have heard of him? Right? Why would we expect him to not pour these out universally? In fact, the Bible specifically says that God causes the rain to fall on the good and the evil, right? This is not news to anybody. You would, in fact, expect exactly what you just said.
That this happens universally. And we have evidence to show why it happens universally.
Okay, it's kind of sad that I have to remind you how to skeptic. That's your identity. And granted, yes, everybody's going to be very directional in their use of their skepticism. We don't have time to do anything else, right? We choose to disagree with and employ skepticism in the areas that really go against our experience. I get that. But you need to provide something. You're making claims to all kinds of studies that you haven't provided a single link for any of them. Like you've given us nothing. So really, just learn how to skeptic better. Now, moving on from that, what would that really prove, right? You know full well that you're addressing a position that is non-falsifiable. It simply cannot be falsified with science, and yet you're appealing to science in order to falsify it. So let's just, even though in the one case already where I've actually checked up on your claim, I found quite the opposite revealed through the scientific literature. Just ignoring that and accepting your claim as valid right from the start. Let's say there's a natural cause that we know and we understand perfectly that we can point to for these miraculous, so-called miraculous healings. Again, why don't we incorporate that into the scientific practice, into the medical practice? If we know it's 100% effective, or even not 100%, if we know it's 10% effective, why is it not brought into the normal course of medical action? Because we don't understand these things quite as soundly as you are making the claim that we do. That would be my hypothesis. And B, again, it being natural and observable and immeasurable through science does not necessarily mean that it is not caused ultimately by God. You have to address the positions that your opponents have. We see rain as a gift from God. Rain is quite natural. We understand how it works. The entire reason that science was invented, again, by Christians, is because we believed in a universal lawgiver, and so we believed that there were universal laws that could be measured and observed and understood by humans. That is actually the very reason why the original scientists, the original philosophers who were putting together the epistemology at the foundation of science and putting together the scientific method, they were seeking for a way to understand their God. You clearly don't understand these little facts of history, and apparently don't understand Christian positions, even though you very often refer to the fact that you used to be, I would assume, some sort of evangelical, just based off of what you have said. You'd be better positioned to reach people who are currently still Christian if you addressed the actual positions of Christians. Enough said.
So why would anybody use this evidence to believe in your God? These personal experiences that you have.
Let me just issue you a challenge here. Prove to me the existence of some third party without appealing to personal experience of any kind.
And the thing is that people tend to, they feel insulted. I think that's the biggest reason, is that, because they say stuff like, well, I'm not crazy. Well, no one's calling you crazy. Well, I'm not stupid. Well, no one's calling you stupid. Well, I'm not a liar. No one's calling you a liar. You know, people will say that when you say maybe you should reevaluate your personal experience because here's reasons why.
What reasons? But going beyond that, let's say you're talking to somebody who has had a religious vision, and you tell them that that vision wasn't reality, that it wasn't something that, it doesn't indicate the truth of whatever they saw or heard or felt. Talking about tactile sense experience. So whatever it was, you're either saying that they hallucinated and didn't know that they hallucinated, and therefore you're calling into question their sanity. You're telling them, or you could be saying that they're lying to you, that they didn't actually see anything and they're just pretending they did. Or you're telling them that whatever it was some sort of fantasy that they had, and that they didn't know the difference between that fantasy and reality, which you could put under the category of stupid or insane. It kind of works under both of those. So when you tell a person that they are wrong to believe their own personal experience, that they're irrational to believe that over your ideology, then what you're doing is you're essentially saying that my beliefs about the way the world and the universe works, my metaphysical beliefs are more solid, and you should trust them more than you should trust your own personal experiences. The things you have seen, heard, felt, tasted, smelled, those are less solid than what I think exists in reality. You are in essence telling them, don't believe your lying eyes. Do you not see how the opposing side could misconstrue that as arrogance?
They always say that. I'm not crazy, I'm not stupid, and I'm not a liar. Nobody's calling you crazy, stupid, or a liar. You're human. And sometimes things happen and your brain doesn't understand how to process it, so you process it in a way that makes sense to you. This
is another way in which I see atheists lacking self-awareness of their own position. What you're claiming here is just as unfalsifiable as anything any theist claims. You are essentially making the claim that other people live in the Matrix when it's convenient for you to have them living in the Matrix. What I mean by that, basically this idea that you can know you exist, right? Descartes' dictum. You can know you exist, but you can't really know for sure that anything outside of you exists. Or at least that it exists in the way in which you perceive it. And that's true. There's really no argument you can make against that sticks. It hasn't happened in hundreds of years, with some of the greatest minds in human history attempting to do so. So what you do is you run to this. Anytime somebody experiences something that goes outside of your ideology, that would tend to prove your ideology wrong, you immediately run to some way of just saying that it didn't actually happen, that somebody just thought it happened, right? Why stop there? Why should it only be my religious experiences that you toss out? Why not tell me my wife doesn't exist? Or my children? Why not tell me my house doesn't exist? Or my clothing, right? I could be sitting here naked and just, for whatever reason, my mind can't comprehend that, so I'm just imagining that I have clothes on. You could say, well, yeah, but a lot of those are things other people have experienced. True, but I only know that because of my experience of those people experiencing those things at the same time. Right? Everything is filtered through my subjective experience in terms of what I know. There's no way to get around that, ever. Personal experience is the only kind of evidence you will ever find. Ever.
There's the name escapes me, but I'm going to post it here. But there's a name, it's basically you look at something and you see a face. You put a face together. So there's no face there, but you end up seeing a face in a toast, a piece of toast or something.
Sure. And theists experience that too, believe it or not. We do actually see those faces and things, because human brains are kind of hardwired to see faces. It makes sense. The other people in our lives are very important to our survival. We are hardwired to look for faces in things. And not just because of the people that help us, but also because of the people that could potentially harm us. But theists know the difference between that and reality. Right? We can all see those faces in a bit of carpet or on a wall. But we also know that that face isn't really there. That it's just a bit of carpet. That it's just a bit of wall. That if you look away and try to find it again after, 2-3 minutes, you probably won't find that same face. And the wall hasn't changed. The carpet hasn't changed. You just now, if you'll probably find another face, but it won't be the same one. Why do you think that you have such a great idea, a solid, a firm understanding of what is real in what you experience and what is not, and that everybody else in the world, 90% of the rest of the world's population, is completely clueless? This is arrogance of the highest order. It really is. I can't find any other word for it. You need to be willing to take other people seriously in some regards, even when it goes against what you believe ideologically. And you can't just brush off their claims with, well, sometimes you see faces and things, so nothing you experience can be trusted. Because that is, you can make that claim. But let's be honest about it, and just say you're going for the brain in the vat argument, going for the matrix argument. That you don't really exist in the way you think you exist. But no, you're going to go a less honest route, and I must admit, far more convenient route to your position, to your ideology. That all experiences which cut against your ideology are just instantly dismissed as unreal. You don't have to explain how any specific instance is unreal, because all of them are unreal. This is intellectually dishonest and lazy, right? You should address all claims individually. Each case should be addressed as a specific case. You should look at that specific case and explain, if you can, why that is not a valid experience. Why it shouldn't be trusted. Because you're not just talking about people trying to convert others. You're talking about how they shouldn't trust their own experiences. So you need to be able to explain to them why that specific experience is something that should not be trusted. You need to be able to do that on every individual case. Or you could simply say, well, it's not important enough to me to bother with it. That would also be honest. But for you to tell someone, oh, well, that experience, you can't trust that, and then leave it there, well, why can't I trust it? Oh, because it's an experience of God. Well, why can't I trust experiences of God? Oh, because God doesn't exist. Well, how do you know that God doesn't exist? Oh, because experiences of God can't be trusted. Can you spot the circular reasoning here? Can you see it?
Or you can also see images. You can see, I know that a lot of times Muslims, for example, they'll say that stuff like in Salah was burned into something. Or like when the World Trade Center came down, there was a cross. People said, oh, that had to be a sign from God kind of thing. No, it's a cross. It's two beams that, crossed. I mean, that's completely expected in a building, especially in rubble. And you're ever going to say this is a sign from God, How horrible. And like, what is it, his signature? Like, oh, destruction, signature, that's kind of a dick move kind of thing.
Okay, so the serious part of that argument, I completely agree with, right? Beams crossing are completely expected within rubble, particularly rubble of modern, sky rises, skyscrapers. completely expected. The other part of that argument, you know full well that is a miscategorization of how your opponents viewed it. Those who saw some sort of a sign in the fact that there was a cross in the rubble saw it as a sign of comfort in grief, a sign that God was with us even in that great confusion and horror and pain and suffering, even then, that God was not far removed. That's the meaning people found in it. They weren't seeing that as God signing his name on a nasty little piece of work there. So, moving on.
But, I'm trying to just basically say that these things, personal experience, if you're going to want people to take personal experience as evidence, then you have to take personal experience from all the other religions as evidence too, and you don't.
Have you ever heard the theist argument that there has to be some sort of God, some sort of deity out there, because 90% of the world believes in it? Across all cultures, across all periods of time, this belief in God arises amongst humans. The very premise of that argument, the very foundation of it, is that theists are taking the experience of all other theists, the personal experiences that they have of deity, of the numinous, they are taking those as some form of evidence. Now, when you're talking about specific things like, I don't know, a vision of Shiva, well, sure, Christians are going to doubt that. They're going to be skeptical of that vision. They'll look at it in the same way that you're looking at all theist visions. They may not make claims quite as strongly and unsupportable as you, right? I would not personally make such unsupportable claims. But each personal experience can be addressed on its own. It's not an all-or-nothing thing. Like I said, if you want to be consistent with your own position, you can't accept any personal experience as evidence of reality. But that's not the way you live, is it? You live as if you can trust your own personal experiences of the outside world. If somebody takes a swing at your face, you're going to duck or flinch or try to block. Why? Because you trust that there's actually a fist coming at your face. You trust that that's going to lead to pain, and that pain is something you do not prefer. Why do you trust any of these things? Those are just personal experiences. You're being inconsistent. See, the fact is, I can be perfectly consistent in accepting some personal experiences as valid evidence, some personal experiences as strong valid evidence, some personal experiences as weak valid evidences, and some personal experiences as invalid evidence of anything whatsoever. Well, I guess that's not true. All personal experience is going to be evidence of something, even if that something is that the person is lying about the personal experiences they claim, or that the person is insane. But I'm going to be honest about my conclusions, right? If I'm concluding that somebody is lying to me, then just come right out and say it. Don't try to beat around the bush with, well, you really experienced what you experienced. You're not stupid enough to misconstrue fantasy for reality. You're not insane enough to see things that aren't there. You're not dishonest enough to lie about this. But you just kind of experienced something that's not really there and mistook it for reality. Or maybe lied. So you're not really going far, you're not going all the way in your implications. You're trying to escape from your implications. But those implications are there. They're inescapable. If you don't believe the person experienced what they claim to experience, or that that experience doesn't have any bearing on reality, the inescapable conclusion is that the person is insane, that they are lying, or that they're too stupid to know the difference between fantasy and reality.
Neither do I. And I don't take your personal experience as evidence either. And in fact, if I, again, if I swear up and down, I swear, I believe in my heart that you, my neighbor, just caused damage to my car, that's not enough to convince somebody. It's not enough to convince a judge that you did it. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we require other evidence.
And that evidence will take the form of other types of personal experience. Or, even better, experience that can be made personal for the judge and jury. Right? But you're still not getting around the fact that the evidence you're providing will still be of the same type. There will not be a qualitative difference in the evidence, at least in terms of personal experience. All evidence that you provide will be personally experienced, and those people who experience it must choose whether or not to trust their own experience of that evidence. That, again, there's no escaping this. Alright, so that concludes Lee's section on personal experience as evidence. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my video here. I recognize that this was a long one. For all of you who stuck through it, thank you. And I will address her other types of evidence in a future video or two. I just felt like personal experience is something that is often discussed in atheist and theist debates, and its reliability, and I thought that it deserved some special attention. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you for watching. Leave your comments below, etc., etc. I will see you guys later.